what does the debug log contain? Contains database changes, HTTP callouts, Apex errors, resource used by Apex, and all the actions which are happening during a Salesforce process. Okay. Now, how do you set up a debug log? Basically, you have to go to setup, then you select the debug log option, and you have to select the user, monitor the user, and you can set up the logging levels, info, warn, finder, and what level of logging you want to do, and what you want to debug, Apex code, profile, etc. What do you want to do that? So we can do that. So apart from that, perform some action in Salesforce, and once you want to debug, and then you can look at the logs. So that is how you will be able to see the logs. Once you set up the logs, what you have to tell the interviewer is, whenever any action happens, whenever any form or data is filled, or any trigger runs or anything, it will be stored into the log. Now, how do you go to the the debug log thing? So basically, you go over here, set up the debug log. Then you can select the traced. You have to select the user that you want to what you call trace, and then you also set the debug level over here. Now there are default debug levels, and you can also create your own debug levels. So couple of things that you may ask you is, what is the trace entity? So let us take a look here. What is traced entity? What all you can trace? Okay. So the question could be, what is a traced entity and debug levels in Apex? So traced entity is the type of log, user, class, or trigger. Okay, what you want to trace. So you have to tell the interviewer that you can not only what you call trace a user, also a class, trigger, or auto process you can trace. And typically what you will do is, in your application you will debug users mainly, in my experience also, and you will track the changes that the user has done or the process that he has used. And the traced entity is the user or the class, etc., whichever you are going to debug. Now the debug levels are, what are the levels? No, if you say select none, no debug will be logged. Error, only error messages, warnings and error messages. Info means log messages, warnings and errors. Debug log, detailed debug information including info, warnings and errors. So you can take, so if you want finer, it logs even more granular debug information than debug level. Okay, so these are the various levels. Now remember one thing, this should be used only in debugging. Going too finer can have performance impact, and should be used only in debugging mode and not in production or in user mode. Otherwise what will happen is your performance will slow down, because Salesforce in the background has to log all the information. So at least you don't need to by heart this, but you should know the levels, at least what each level does. Okay, at least you should be able to tell the at least 4 levels if the interviewer asks you, like warn, info. Basically you will use debug. Okay, so info is enough for you to work on this. So to take a look here, uh, suppose we set up a new log. Even though this is not a tutorial, we'll just take a quick look here at what we were talking about. So already there are some logs existing. So we create a new log, so that you should understand, see, even though it's an interview question, you should understand. So this is the traced entity. So these are the things you can trace: Apex class, Apex trigger, user. Okay. Usually you will not get a question like, what is, uh, how do you track, trace, automated process, platform integration. You will not get that level of questions unless usually what happens when you select a user, all the activities that happen in the background, whether it is a trigger, whether it is a process that the user runs, okay, the user executes, will be tracked. So the best option is to select user. But if you want to go deeper, if you're having a problem with a particular trigger, you can also select a trigger or a class. So if you select a trigger or a class, the traced entity, you can go to that specific trigger. Okay, but right now usually the best practice is you go to a user and select the user. So select the user, and then the debug level, as I told you, there is a default debug level which we can select, or you can select your own debug level that just we saw now, right? So these are the levels we saw: the error, warning, what are the things that will get finer. So please remember, these are the various debug levels. You should use it only for debugging, otherwise there will be a performance impact.